Hello everyone, and today I have another MATLAB tutorial for you. This one covering MATLAB App Designing using the Guide and App Designer utilities. This is courtesy of Dr. Nouman Azam, and he has also provided us with a limited number of free coupons into the course on Udemy. All you need to do is go to the page and enter in YouTube free to redeem a free coupon. So if you have any questions following this tutorial, you may want to enroll in the course. And I'm sure Dr. Azam can assist you with any questions you may have related to MATLAB. So without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome to the course MATLAB App Designing, the ultimate guide for MATLAB apps. Let's see what we have in this course. This course has essentially two segments. The first segment is about creating apps using the MATLAB conventional utility called Guide. And then in the second segment of this course, we will be looking at creating apps using the MATLAB new utility called the App Designer. Essentially, in the first segment, we have 5 different portions, chapters, or parts. So in the first chapter, we will be looking at the basics of the guide. The topics that we will be including are accessing guide, the available controls, properties of the different controls, the alignment options, the grid lines, and many other similar topics. In the second segment or chapter of this first segment, we will be looking at how to link the code with the GUI. That is, how to write meaningful code behind a different user interface controls. In such, we will be looking at how to manipulate tables, list boxes, pop-up menus, axes, sliders, radio buttons, checkboxes, and other user interface controls that are available in the MATLAB guide. In the third chapter of this first segment, we will be looking at some of the advanced techniques such as how to pass command line arguments to the GUI, how to pass values between two different GUIs, and similar other topics. In the chapter 4, we will be looking at some simple projects that can be done with the help of the guide. And then finally, in chapter 5, we will be looking at more examples and tricks that you can do in order to take full advantage of the guide utility. In the second segment of the course, we will be looking at the second utility of MATLAB for creating apps, that is the App Designer. It is introduced in the 2016 A and B versions of the MATLAB. So this segment essentially contains four different parts or 4 different chapters. So in the first chapter, we will be discussing the topics such as the design view and code view of the App Designer, briefing on available controls, the alignment options, the spacing options, and the grid lines, and similar other topics. In the second chapter of this segment, we will be looking at some of the tools for correcting errors and detecting errors and some of the useful shortcuts that are available in the App Designer. In the third chapter, we will be looking at all the graphical user interface controls that are available in the App Designer. We will be looking at detailed examples how to actually code the behavior of these different user interface controls. In the next chapter, we will be looking at some of the advanced techniques such as passing values between two GUIs, packaging your app, and many others that will essentially help you in order to create great user interface. In the final chapter, we will be looking at some of the sample projects that can be developed using the App Designer.
Hi, in this segment I will be showing you how to access the guide utility of MATLAB. So basically you need to go to the command line and type guide and then press enter. So a dialog box will appear over here which have 4 options. So basically in this course we will be using the default option, which is a blank GUI. So when you press enter, the guide utility of MATLAB will appear. You can resize the size of this guide, and you can also save it as well. So that's pretty much it. In this segment, I will be showing you the basic user interface controls that the guide provides. So basically, it provides you with the push button option as well. This button is used to trigger some event onto your GUI. For instance, the user may enter some values and you want to enter it, and some processing to happen after you press this particular button. The next one is the slider option. So basically, it provides you with the ability to slide this and to control different items based on that. Remember, you can also use the values. You can mention that what's the minimum value when the slider is at one extreme position, and you can also mention another value when it is at its other extreme option, right? I will show you that later on. Similarly, you have radio buttons, you have checkboxes. Checkboxes are basically used where you have multiple options and you want to select a particular one. Then you have the editable text and the static text. The editable text is used to take inputs. What do you mean by that is that it is editable, and in the static text, it's static. I mean, the user cannot change it by himself. Right, so this is the basic difference between these two. Then you have the pop-up menu. The pop-up menu appears something like this, that whenever you click this particular drop-down menu, so it's a list of options will appear. Then you have a list box. Basic difference between these two is that the options will only appear after the user hit this particular area. While here all the options are being listed, and you can scroll up and down in order to see that. Then you have the toggle button. The difference between this and this one is that you can only associate certain actions when pressing this button and releasing it. While here you have two separate options, that one is for pressing it and the other one is for releasing it. Then you have tables. Tables are used to hold tabular data. And then you have axes. The axis is used for holding images as well as for plotting graphs and other stuff. Then you have panels. If you want to hold multiple items under one user control, for instance, I made a panel here and I include buttons to it and certain stuff to it, right? So now this panel is actually holding 3 items. I want them appear together. So it's basically for grouping different user interface controls. And then you have button group. So if you have multiple buttons and if you want to group them together in a hierarchy, so it also provides you with this option. Activist control, it's basically advanced options, and mostly we will not be concerned with it, but if you want to learn it, I will give you some hints in the course. Okay, so these were the available options that you have. Once you have set up your GUI, the next step is to save it. So remember that whenever we are saving it, we should give it meaningful name. For example, this one was our exercise 1. I'm weak in spelling, so pardon me. So when we save it, remember that we are going to have 2 files for it. One is the figure file .fig and the other one is .m file. So the M files generate the codes automatically for this particular figure file, and the figure file will hold our GUI, and this is the code that is working behind that GUI. So remember that whenever you save it, these 2 files will always be generated: the figure file that holds your GUI and the .m file, which contains the code that's automatically being generated based on this particular GUI and the user interface controls that you have selected. Okay, so that's enough for now. See you in the next lecture. Okay, so in this lecture we will be looking at the properties of different user interface controls, and they are very, very important part of this GUI. So let us see what are the properties of the push button. So remember, you need to include this in order to see the properties of it. and when you double click it, the properties of it will appear. So you have a very broad array of properties for this push button. For example, you can set the background color, which by default is this one, and similarly you can set some data to it. We will see some of these properties when we do different kind of examples and include this push button into those examples, so we will see them there. But for now, you can check that the font size, you can change the size of the font as well. For example, you can say 12. Similarly here, okay, here you do not have any options that are available. So how to see the options for the font? If you want to change the font name, how we can do that? There is a command which you can type over here. For example, you can say list fonts, and it will list all the fonts that are supported by MATLAB. So if you like some of these fonts, for example, I like Times New Roman, so I can select it from here and I can paste it into that particular area, and the font will automatically change when I press enter. Okay, so let's see what's the result. Okay, so it has now been changed to Times New Roman. Okay, similarly you have other properties of the fonts as well. You can also add some functions when the key is pressed and the key is released. Remember, this maximum and minimum does not apply to this particular button. It applies to some other user interface controls. We'll see that when we do some examples on those particular user interface controls. Okay, the most important that you should note is this property, which is known as tag. Remember, when we will be writing our code corresponding to this particular GUI or any GUI, so you will need these tags in order to do some operation on these user interface controls. Either you want to change some values of it, or you want to do you want to apply some logic onto this particular user interface control. So you will need this value in order to interact with this particular user interface control. So remember, it is very, very important. The other important one is this default value, which appears on the user interface control. So if I change it to, let's say, button 1, so and also remember that you need to press enter in order to so that this will take effect onto your GUI as well. Okay, so let's see. Now it has changed to button 1, right? So the most important one is this string and take properties. And once again, the take property will be used when we write code behind this user interface control, and we will use this tag in order to refer to this particular user interface control. So these two are very, very important. Okay, and for the rest of these properties, they will differ from user interface control to user interface control. Some of them will remain same, and some of them will be keeping on changing. So we will see some of these properties later on when we write different kind of programs. So they will be used, so don't worry about them. For now, just remember that we need tag and string in order to start programming and start using these user interface controls in our programs. So these are the two very, very important properties: tag and the initial string. The initial string change the values of the user interface controls, and the tag will be used in our programming when we want to aid or refer to this particular user interface controls. Okay, see you in the next lecture. In this segment, I will be demonstrating the use of align utility that is provided you by the guide. So basically, it is located over here, and it is used to align the user interface controls either horizontally or vertically, depending on your choice. So I will demonstrate it with the help of a simple example. Suppose you have radio buttons, and I copy and paste different instances of it. So let's say you have one button over here and another button over here, and now you want to align them automatically, either horizontally or vertically. So you have different options that is provided by this particular utility, for example, and it is divided into two groups: vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. And in the vertical alignment, again, you have two options: align and distribute. So this distribute basically sets up the space between different user interface controls, and again it provides you with different options for that. And again, you can set the space to a particular size, which is provided over here. Okay, so this first option, it will align all of these controls vertically using this style, and this will use this particular style. Similarly, for the horizontal, you have so many different options. So let's say we first distribute it, and after it will take effect after you press apply. So now see, this button has changed its position, so now they are being distributed equally. And the next step, I want to distribute them in the center, so with respect to center they will be aligned. So now see, all of them has changed their position. So similarly, you can try other options as well, and other user interface controls, and try different versions of this particular alignment options. So that's pretty much it for this segment. See you in the next segment.
In this segment, we will be looking at the grid and rulers. So it is located here in the tool, and you can select it from here. Okay, so what it gives you is the default grid size, which is 50. So you can change the grid size, either you can decrease it by 10, so you can see now very small and finer grid boxes over here, or you can extend it from here. Let's say you can select 60 or 70 and so on. Okay, the other thing is, in this particular dialog box is the show ruler option. It gives you the sizes of the grid in the on this GUI in terms of the pixels. So remember that each pixel here is 1/96 of an inch in Windows and 1/72 of an inch on Macintosh. Okay, the other option is this one, snap to grid. So if you check it, what its effect will be is that it will cause any object that is moved closer to a grid line to jump to that line. So if you draw a particular component over here, and if you want to change its size, so see, it will when it comes closer to this particular grid line, it will jump to that line, right? So see, up to this point it is not jumping, but after this line it has jumped to this line. So it's a particular useful option that you can use. Similarly, if you want to divide your GUI into some meaningful parts, for instance, I want to create 4 parts of this GUI, so you can actually drag lines from here by clicking it here and dragging it over here. So it will serve as a reference point in order to group your items onto this GUI. So similarly, we can add a vertical line like this, and I want another vertical line like this. So I can actually divide my GUI into some meaningful portions. Remember that these lines are not going to be visible on your final GUI output. So for instance, if I run it after saving it, so they are not going to appear as part of my GUI. So the only purpose of these lines is to provide and give you some hint in order to adjust your components on this GUI. So this was about that grid and lines options. Hope you are learning this course and enjoying this course. Hi, so in this segment we will be looking at the tab editor. Again, you can access it from here, that is the tools, and then you can go here, the tab editor order. Okay, so you may have noticed that some of the users they prefer to interact with the GUI from the keyboard rather than with the mouse. So when they are using the keyboard, the button tab on the keyboard can be used to select or to toggle between different user interface components. So a very natural question in that case that comes to the mind is that what should be the order of different type of controls. So when I want to go from one component to another component, what will be the order? In other words, when I press the tab button, so what will be the order in which different components will be accessed? So that order is basically set by the component called a tab order editor. In order to demonstrate this, we will select certain components from here. So suppose we have a push button, then we have a pop-up menu, and then we have a list box, right? So when we go here again to the tab order editor, so you may note that the default order is the order in which I have created these user interface components. So suppose if I run it, I need to save it before running it. So see that this is the first one which is going to be selected, then this is the second one, and then this is the third one which is going to be selected. So if I want to change the order in which they are going to be selected based on the tab that I pressed, so again we can go to the tab order editor, and then we can say that okay, I want this to be the last one to be selected, right? So now it is at the very end, the push button. So again, if I run it, so now the first one is, this one is being selected, and then this one is being selected, and then this was the last one which is being selected. Okay, so an important point to note is that when we are using this panel or button group, so then the items within this button group, they will be tabbed differently. I mean, they will be tabbed separately from these particular options. So if I add one checkbox over here, and then if I add another checkbox over here and another checkbox over here, and if I click this one, and then again if I go to the tab order, so I see only the components that are present over here. So this means that the items within the button group or in the panel, they are going to be tabbed differently. Their order will be selected differently, and these will be treated differently. So again, if I run it, you can notice that. Okay, so the first one is this one, the second one is this one, the third one is this one, and then in the fourth one I have selected this one is the first, this one is the second, this one is the third. So remember this, that these are ordered separately, and these items which are not in a group, they are ordered separately. So this was a particular tool that you can use in your GUIs as well. Thanks for. In this segment, I will be demonstrating two very important functions that are frequently used in the graphical user interface of MATLAB, which is guide. So these two functions are the set function and the get functions. So in order to demonstrate these two functions, I consider a very simple example. I added an editable text box over here and a static text box over here. And another thing I need is a push button over here. Okay, so in this example, basically I want the user to enter some value over here, and then I will display the same value over here as well. So let's investigate different properties of it. So I want the initial text to appear here as null. I do not want any text to appear here in the beginning, and the tag is edit1 in this case. And similarly for this text box, I will edit its tag to text1, and the initial text I want some empty. That is, I do not want any text to appear in the beginning of the program. Okay, then we need to go to the callbacks over here, and then I will demonstrate the two functions here in the callback of this function. Okay, so the two functions are these two. That is, the first function is the get function, and the second one is the set functions. Okay, let us look at the first function, that is the get function. So the syntax here is like this, that get, and then we need to specify the particular graphical user interface object by specifying its unique tag, which in this case is edit1. So I am going to retrieve from edit1 its string property, right? So whatever the user entered there, it will be retrieved and stored in this variable a. Okay, in the second line, that is the set function, we are setting the property of text1, and we are setting its string property, and then what we are setting it to, we are setting it to variable a, right? So in general, this get function is used to retrieve values or properties of certain user interface controls, and the set function is used to set a particular properties of the user interface controls. So let's run this program. Okay, so the user may enter some values over here, and then this value is going to appear over here, right? So whatever the user enter here, it is going to appear there. So it was a very simple program, and remember these two functions, set function and get function, they will be very, very frequently used in this course. So try to do a lot of examples using these two functions, the set functions and the get functions. Remember, we can use it with any user interface control, and in general, the set function is going to set certain properties of the user interface control item that we are specifying, and the get function, it will retrieve certain properties of the user interface control. Okay, so see you in the next.
Welcome to the new segment of the course. In this segment, we will be creating a GUI that will be serving the purpose of adding two numbers and then showing the result of those two numbers to us. So it's a very, very simple example, and I hope you will enjoy it. So first we need three static texts. This is one, and then you can copy it and paste it here. So it's the second one, and then we need a third one as well. We also need three instances of editable text. We will use this to enter the values and also show the result. And we need another one as well. And we also need a push button for this. Okay, so for this one, we can change the properties, and the initial text, we can change it, and we can change it to enter first number. And then for the second one, we can similarly change its properties, and we will change the property of the string, and we can write enter the second number. Okay, and then we can also change the properties over here, and we can say, for instance, the result. Okay, and we can also change the initial values over here. We can change it to 0, the default value, and we can change the value here as well. We can say the default value is, let's say, 0. Make sure you press enter after setting this value so that it appears and updates in the main GUI as well. And then here we can change it also to 0. Okay, and we can push it here so that it is approximately in the center. Okay, so when the GUI starts, the user will enter first value over here, second value over here, and then the final result will appear over here. So we need to save it. I will give it a name, addition, simple addition. We have already one instance open of that, so we can say addition 2. Okay, so now it's saved. And if we want to see how the GUI will look, so the user will enter first value over here, second value over here, and then the result will appear automatically over here when we enter the push button. Okay, so now we go to the callbacks of the push button, and we will enter some code into it. So I have already written the code, and I will explain now it to you. So first, what we are doing is from editable text number 1, we are taking an input in the form of a string and storing it into variable x, and then similarly from editable text 2, we are taking the input in the form of a string and storing it in variable y, and then since these two are in string format, we need to change it to numeric form. So this is a built-in MATLAB function which will convert this string variable into a numeric variable. Similarly, this will also do the job. And then in the editable text number 3, I am showing the result of x plus y, so I'm using the set function instead of the get function. So we can run this program and see how it's doing. So I enter 2, I enter 5, and then when I push, the result is 7, which is appearing over here. So that was a very simple example. Hope you are enjoying it.
In this lecture, I will be showing you how the slider control works. Basically, we will be using an example to demonstrate this. In the example, I will be using a slider, and then the value of the slider will be used to plot a particular sine function. So basically we need a slider here. We can drag it from here. Then we can check its properties. Remember, these two are very important properties of the slider, maximum and minimum. It means that when you scroll down the slider, its value will change between these two extremes. 0 the starting value and 1 as the ending value. The tag of the slider is slider 1. The next thing we need is an axis. This will hold our graph. We want to make it into the center so that it looks better. Okay. The next thing is we need to go to the callback of this particular slider, and in the callback we will add a couple of lines to demonstrate. Okay, so the first line, again, it's very straightforward. We are taking the value of the slider, so when the user slides between different values, it will return different values. Then this is a variable x. Basically it is taking values from 0 to 50 and with a step size of 0.1. Means that the first value that will be assigned to x is 0, the next one is 0.1, then 0.2 up to 50. The variable y, it is containing the sine. Remember, the sine is a built-in function in MATLAB, so it will multiply this value a, with all the values of x, and then we are plotting it. In the plot function, remember, we need to add this handles.axis1. This is the axis which will hold this plot, and this plot is again a built-in function in MATLAB. It will plot the values of x against the values of y. So we need to save it. We also need to save it, and then we are ready to go. So when we change the value of the axis, see the upper graph, it is also being changing. So it is changing basically based on the value of this slider. Okay, so if you want to see the values of the slider explicitly, you can add another text box over here. And then we can see what's the tag of this particular text box. We want to make sure we are using the correct take for this. So it is take 1, and then we can go again to the code that we have just written, and in this code we can add another line. That is, so this line is basically setting the property of text box 1, or the string property, that is, it will contain the values of this particular slider that is specified by values A. So when we run it again and change the value of the slider, we can see that the text box is now containing the values of the slider. Remember, the minimum value is 0 that we have set in the properties of this slider, and the maximum value is 1. So we can also see the results over here. So that's pretty much done. You can also make other uses of the slider and use it in your code according to your specification. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next lecture. In this segment, I will be demonstrating how to access the app designer, and I will be also introducing different components that are available in the graphical user interface of the app designer. So first, in order to access the app designer, you just need to type app designer in the main MATLAB command line. So when you enter it, the app designer utility will appear over here. So some kind of this window will appear in your screen. Okay, so within this main window, you have different kind of components. So on the left hand side, you see there is a component library. It contains all the graphical user interface controls that the app designer allows you and provides you with. So there we have annexes, we have button, checkboxes, drop down menu, edit field, and many others. So we have also some interesting components which were not available previously in the previous version of the graphical user interface of MATLAB, and these are these gadgets and different gadgets that you can use. For example, discrete knob, this knob with this kind of a slider, pointed kind of a knob, and similarly you have this lamp and gadgets. So they looks like a speedometer on the car. So similarly you have 90-degree gauge, which means the scale is the same, but you have only 90 degrees of that. Similarly, you have other kind of interesting switches and toggle switches as well. So these are different kind of components that are available, and in the course we will be learning all of them in detail. Okay, so in the main window you have two options over here. One is the design view and the other one is the code view. So in the design view, actually you have all of these user interface controls available to you, and you can actually design your GUI over here. In the code view, when I hit the code view, you will notice that this window has now been updated, and now you have two more components over here. One is the code browser and the other one is app layout. So app layout will contain the layout of your design. So in the code view, remember, you cannot view the design, but here this will give you a rough idea how your design is. So it is very useful for remembering your design view. In the code browser, we will be covering it in the later on lectures, so don't worry about this. Similarly, when we go back in the design view, we have two more components over here. One is called the component browser and the other one is the component properties. So for instance, if I drag a button over here, so you see that we have an dot button over here now. So this is actually the name of this particular component that we have added, and this
shows us the properties of that component. For example, it's text and different other properties. So when we cover in detail these different graphical user interfaces, we will be also discussing these properties of individual components over here. Similarly, if we add another component, so you will see now there is an addition over here, and also we have different properties, and now the properties have been changed based on our selection. So if we select this, we have different properties. If we select this, we have another set of properties. So don't worry about this as well for now. Just this was an introduction that what kind of interface we will be dealing with, and we will be covering them in detail. So for now, you just remember that from where you can add the components, and there are two, design view and a code view. In the code view, we will be writing useful code in order to control the behavior of these controls. And similarly, we have the browser, the component browser, which allows us to see different components and along with their different properties. So hopefully you will be enjoying this course. See you in the next lecture. In this segment, we will be looking at the available graphical user interface components that are available in the App Designer. And the list is available here on the left hand side of your App Designer. So if we want to group them, so some of these graphical user interface components are work by pressing them. So a typical example is like a button, and we have state buttons, we have static buttons, and we have some kind of these switches. So they typically work by clicking them. The other one is like this one, the axis. It holds the output of some data manipulation that you perform, and the other group is like selecting from certain options that are available onto your GUI, for example checkboxes and the radio buttons, etc. Okay, so if we look from the top, we have an axis. So typically it will hold graphs and plots. Similarly, you have button. So if you want, these are typically used when you want to trigger some event in your GUI. We have checkboxes. Checkboxes are typically used for checking a particular option that is available in your design. We have drop-down menus. Drop-down menus contains a list of options, and these options can be accessed when you hit the drop-down arrow over here. Similarly, you have now two kinds of data entry fields. One is for numeric, and the other one is for textual data. The other component is the static label. It contains like static data. That is, when we want to include certain text into our GUI, and we do not want to manipulate that. I mean, we do not want to change that. Similarly, you have a list box. In the list box, you have different options, but again, its style is different from the drop-down menu. Drop-down menu only shows one option, and when you click this this arrow-like thing, so the other options will appear. But here, depending on the size of this list box, you have different options available to you. The other one is the radio button group. So if you want to select a particular option from here, you can select appropriate radio button over there. Similarly, we have a slider. So slider is used in order to take readings from a particular GUI, or if you want to have operations like zoom in and zoom out into your on your images, so you can also use that. Some of the other options we have is the spinner. So again, it will hold one value, and there is a minimum and maximum value between which you can spin its values. Similarly, we have state buttons, text area. So text area is used to hold some textual data. For instance, if we want to display certain contents of a text file or some other document that you want to display. Similarly, we have toggle button groups, and we have some containers, and there is already made templates for you. And the most interesting part that we will be working on is these gadgets and different kinds of gadgets. So we have very beautiful interfaces and graphical user interfaces that are equipped here in the App Designer. So basically we will be looking at these as well, which are additional and were not included in the previous version of the MATLAB GUI. So a final comment is that we will be looking at each of these graphical user interface components in detail in the second section, in the third section of this course, and we will be elaborating each of them by using suitable examples. So if the main purpose of this lecture was just to give you an idea that what kind of graphical user interface components you can encounter and you can use in the App Designer utility. So stay tuned. In this segment we will be looking at the alignment and arranging options. So in order to demonstrate them, we will consider a couple of components. There is a button and a checkbox. Okay, so in order to apply these alignment options, you have different options. That is alignment from the right, alignment in the middle, and alignment from the left. So if I click any one of them, for instance alignment from the left, so you will notice that the components have changed their locations, and now they are being aligned from the left. Similarly, you can apply and use the other option. This one is alignment from the middle, this one is alignment from the center, and this one is alignment from the bottom. We do not want that in this case. It will be meaningful if you change the positions a little bit, and you apply it now. So see, now they're aligned from the bottom. One more thing is that when we are trying to select multiple graphical user interface components, so there are two options. One is to select them using the mouse like this, and the other one is to press the control button on your keyboard and then click the individual components like this one, right? Similarly, you can use the other options like this one, alignment from the center, and alignment from the top. So you will notice that a little bit changes are also affected and reflected over these components. Okay, so now let us look at some of the arrange options. In the arrange options, the first one is the same size option. So again, there are three options over here. This one will make the selected components to have the same height. So now you will notice that a little bit change in the height of this component. Remember that the one with the bigger height will be used as a reference in this case. Okay, the other option is to have the same width. So when I apply this one, so they have changed a little bit in the width, and similarly I can apply both of them at the same time, right? Okay, the other final option is the grouping option. So when I click this one, it will make these components to belong to the same group. Now the benefit of this is that you can drag them together without worrying that some of them might not be selected. So when they are in the same group, you can actually drag them wherever you want, and they will go side by side together. That was some of the additional options with regards to aligning and arranging options. The alignment options are located over here, and they allow you to align your graphical components either horizontally or vertically, or from the left or from the middle or from the right. And these are this one is used to group different components together so that you can drag them to different places in your GUI, and this one applies the same height or width options. See you in the next segment. So in this segment, we will be looking at some of the more options that are available over here, through which you can actually manipulate your graphical user interface components. So for example, we can drag a couple of components from here. Okay, so the first option here is the auto spacing option. So let's say you can fix some value over here, and the values are always going to be in pixels. So if I apply the auto spacing option and I want to apply it horizontally, and I want the spacing of 50 between all these components. So if I apply this one, so you can see now that these components have a horizontal spacing of 50 pixels. Similarly, if I can also apply the vertical option, and now you can see that they have a horizontal a vertical spacing of 50 pixels, right? Similarly, there are a few other interesting options over here. One of these options is that show alignment hints, right? So when you are going to change the position of a particular component, it's going to give you some alignment hints, right? So here now it is saying that it is in the middle of your GUI, and now it is saying that it is along the same line here with this component. Similarly, it will also show you different alignment options. Here now it means that it is in the center of the component that is above it. Right, so similarly other options are being shown as well. So this is very useful if you want to arrange your graphical user interface components onto this GUI. Okay, there is another option, which is this one. It gives you resizing hints. For instance, if I select this one and I am interested in changing the size of these components, right? So it will work with a single one, right? So here on these on the left hand side and beneath the right hand side, you can see those small numbers. It is actually the size in pixels that is being shown over there, right? So if I change its size, you can notice that the numbers on at the bottom and the numbers on to the left of this component, they're also being changing. So they are actually giving you some hints regarding the size of this graphical user interface component. Again, they can be quite useful if you want to do fine alignment on your graphical user interface components. That's all for this lecture. See you next. In this segment, we will be looking at the grids. Grids are very useful for creating the layout of your graphical user interface, and it will be useful to align and arrange your different graphical user interface components on your GUI. So the grid option is basically located over here. With the grids, we have a couple of more options. Like the first option we are looking at here is the interval. By that we mean the size of these boxes that are included in this grid. So for instance, if I include a higher value, for instance 50, you will notice that the box sizes are now quite bigger compared to the previous one. Similarly, we can adjust it to 30 or 35. Remember that the minimum value that we can have here is 10. So below 10, the app designer will not allow any value. Okay, so let's suppose we are including some button over here, right? So with respect to these grid lines, we can notice that we can have some hints regarding the size of these graphical user interface components. So if I include more more graphical components from here, we can actually have a good idea regarding the relative size. The other useful option is that snap to grid option. What it's actually doing is that it will only allow your graphical user interface component to be aligned with these grids, right? So you will notice that it's now jumping between different boxes. So if you want that kind of an alignment, so you need to click over here, right? So again, in summary, we have two options. One is the interval size, and the other one is the snap to grid option. You can use, and they're quite useful in arranging your graphical user interface component on on this canvas. So hopefully you're enjoying the course. See you in the next lecture.
In this segment, we will be creating a simple program for adding two numbers together. So for that, we will need a button, and we will choose from these two options. So both of these options can be used in this case. First, we will demonstrate using the numeric edit field, and then we will demonstrate the same phenomena using the text edit field. So with the numeric edit field, it's pretty much straightforward. We need a couple of edit boxes, edit fields to hold the numeric value, and then another one which will store the result of the addition of these two numbers. So for simplicity, remember that this represents actually the name of the field, and within our program, within our code, we will refer to this edit field as app.value1. Similarly, we will call it value2, and we will call it value1, and this one we will call it as result. Okay, so now we have three. Okay, so there are a few interesting properties of this edit field. The first one that is located over here, if we exactly select this one, is the value. So this is the default value. You can delete it, and then the default value will be an empty. Similarly, this is the minimum and maximum value that it can hold. Okay, so it says that the default value must be present over there. And then there are some other display options. For instance, if you want exactly some number of digits that you want to display, or if you want to specify the number of decimals that you want that this edit field should have, or if you want to choose only the integer values. Similarly, we can have scientific numbers, and we can also define our own custom way of defining the values over here. And these are some other properties. For example, enable or disable will mean that the user cannot change this value, and if we make it enable, then it means that the user can. It is visible inside the GUI when the GUI runs. Similarly, this editable field means that the user can edit the value over here. That is, he can change the value over here once it is in running form. And if we disable this, it will mean that the user cannot change this value. It can only be programmatically changed within the code that you write. Okay, so we now have our GUI ready, and we select it as a default value, suppose this one. Okay, so now we will go to the code, and when when the user press this button, I want the values that are present within these two edit fields to be added together, and the results should be displayed over here. So I add another function over here, that is the callback function of this push button, and I will write few lines of code. I have already written it, so I just copy and paste it. So now this first line is telling us that get the val1, and what I want to get its value. So remember, this is the
data structure which holds our different components of this GUI. So I am interested in this part of this data structure, that is val1, which is our edit field, and I am interested in its value, right? So it will be stored in variable 1. Similarly, I will store the value 2 from this particular graphical component, and I will store it into variable b, and then finally I am adding the two together, and this will be shown in the edit field result. So when I run this program, then I can enter some useful values, for example 8, and when I press it, so the result should appear over here. So that was pretty much a straightforward example. Now we can achieve the same thing using the textual edit field. I will show you how. So we can delete, instead of using these numeric edit fields, we can choose the textual edit field and apply a slightly different code to that. So for instance, if I get this one, remember this is now the textual edit field. So I need 3 instances of this. Okay, and I will change its name, so it will hold our value 1, so I call it val1. Okay, similarly I will call this val2, and I will call it result. Right, and I want to add some functionality to the callback of this push button. That is, when I press this button, I want the value of these two to be added together. So I have written the code already. Remember that in this case, our the value that we enter is in string form, right? Because we are using the string, the textual edit field, so the value here will be in string form. So this value is in string. So what I am doing, I am changing it to numeric value, and I am using the built-in MATLAB built-in function, that is str to num. So it will convert this value into numeric form, and similarly this value will also be converted into numeric form, and then these two will be added together. And since this is also a textual edit field, it can only hold textual data, so I am converting the result back again into string by using this MATLAB function, that is num to str, and essentially it will do the same job. So if I run it and I enter some values over here, 5 and another 5, and then when I press this button, the result of 10 will appear over here. But remember, this 10 is in string form or in textual form, not in numeric form. Hopefully you are enjoying the course.
In this segment, I will demonstrate the use of knobs. So they are very much similar to the slider component, and they have very similar properties. So if we look at this side, it has a default value, the minimum and the maximum, and the display minor ticks. So you can change it here. For instance, I want it to be displayed after 20, right? Or you want the minor ticks to be there or not, right? So it is controlled based from here. In this example, we can use the same gauges, and we can add a callback function for the knob, and by changing the value of this knob, we will basically change the value of the gauge. So we will say ape.gauge dot, remember the spelling, dot value to be equals to the value of this particular gauge. So when we run this program, you can see that we can change the value of this gauge based on this knob, right? Similarly, another interesting component is this discrete knob. Remember, it has only 4 values: off, low, medium, and high. So if we look at the properties, you can add some other values here as well. For instance, you want 5 values to appear over here, so you can add values from here, right? but in this case we don't want it. We want the default values of off, low, medium, and high. And okay, so I will add a callback function in order to demonstrate its functioning. So we are here. So what I want is that if the value is equivalent to off, I want a value of 0 on the gauge. If it is low, I want it to be set to 33. If it is medium, I want to set the value of this gauge to 66. And if it is high, I want the value to be 100. So we can write a simple piece of code for that. That is, if is equal the value, if this is equivalent to off, remember it's a string value, so we want the if dot gauge value to be equivalent to 0, else if the value is equal to the second value is low in this case. So if it is low, I will set the f dot gauge dot value to equals to 33, and similarly we can copy it a couple of more times and paste it over there. So similarly, if it is equal to let's say medium, so I will set it to 66, and if none of these cases apply, I will say else. In any other case, I want to set it to exactly 100. So this is a simple piece of code. Let's run it again and see how it is working. So basically we are going to set these values now. So if it is low, we want a value of 33. If it is medium, if it is high, it is 100. If it is medium, for medium somehow it's not working. Probably we have made some mistake. Now the spelling is different, so we need to write the correct spelling. So let's check the medium again. By medium we should have 66 value. So it's pretty much straightforward and simple example in order to demonstrate the use of knobs. Hope you are enjoying the course.